I needed to have the experience of profound egotism in my career in order to understand what a blockage it was for me to develop as a spiritual being. I was deeply triggered by memories of things that happened to me in childhood. There was a lot of trauma. When you go deeper and deeper into higher dimensional states, you begin to realize that there is no separation between you and me. I've had some mind-blowing mystical experiences. It is profoundly life-altering. There are many pathways to expanding your consciousness. You're doing it in order to heal yourself. When you turn inward and you see what really resonates for you, and you have that ability to recognize the difference between something that's feeding you spiritually and something that's feeding your ego, then you can organically fall into the pathway that will lead you to your growth.
Hello and welcome to Soul Unique. I'm Anu Peter. My goal with Soul Unique is to assist you in uncovering, forging, and navigating your own personal spiritual path. A path that resonates intimately with who you are and with your unique signature and essence as you navigate your life here on planet Earth. Today's guest is a personal empowerment coach and author, my good friend in the realms of transformational exploration, inquiry, and experience, Patrick Prohaska. But before we begin, I want to be sure you know that, as is the case with every episode of Soul Unique, if anything is mentioned during the episode that you'd like to know more about, just go to soulunique.com for more information on every topic that is discussed. I also have links to any resources such as books that were mentioned in the episode. And you can find all of that for free at soulunique.com. And while you're there, please sign up for my mailing list. And now moving on to my guest, Patrick Prohaska is a personal empowerment coach and an author of 2 books with a third on the way. Sounds like you're birthing babies, but you kind of are, I guess, when you're writing a book. He has a bachelor's degree in philosophy and a master's degree in the religions of ancient India. He's also created a system of healing called LightBridge. And I think Patrick could also be called a mystic, as he has been on a rich spiritual path that began in childhood when he started meditating at a time before he even knew what it was. And we'll hear more about that today. So welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Oh, it's so great to have you with me here on Soul Unique and to see you and reconnect with you. So I'd love to start off talking about the 180-degree shift that you've shared with me that you made in the middle of your career from, I guess, the hospitality industry to the world of personal transformation and spirituality. Can you start us off by talking a little bit about that?
Yes, and I actually want to set the stage for that because many, many years ago in my youth, I was passionately interested in the religions of the world. I wanted to understand why people believed what they believed. I wanted to understand the mystical experiences that people had that informed their belief systems. And I spent many years studying that, but for the most part, I studied it intellectually. I studied it academically. And I was actually working on my PhD in religion in modern India when I finally abandoned that pathway, that academic pathway, and went into the restaurant industry. And then I spent many, many years in upscale hospitality, following an ego-driven path in which I had to work at the most prestigious restaurant that was around. I was driven to work with celebrity chefs. I was driven to compete with other people for who had the most power and control in the restaurant setting. And all of that wasn't serving me at all. It wasn't feeding me. It was actually destroying my health. It was destroying my relationships. It was making life very, very unpleasant for me because all these goals that I had of being top dog, they could never be achieved because nobody can ever really climb on top of the pile without it falling over. And eventually that's what happened. I basically climbed to the top of that pile and then it fell over and fell on top of me. And I ended up leaving the restaurant industry because of a medical crisis. I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought that my life was coming to a close, but really I was just having an existential crisis and a severe panic attack that lasted for several months. And in the midst of all that panic, I decided that I was going to shut down the pathway of egotism, shut down my restaurant career, and go back into my roots, which was understanding why people believe what they believe and the mystical experiences that inform their beliefs. But this time I wanted to do it as an insider rather than an outsider. And I dove into the experiential study of a lot of different mystical traditions, shamanic traditions, and eventually moved into the pathway of um, the LightBridge system that Anu mentioned at the very beginning that I developed, this healing transformational system that's all about um, spiritual growth, connecting with your higher self, connecting through your higher self, and going into something that's much more profound and empowering and satisfying and fulfilling. So that's kind of the broad strokes of what really happened. Along the way, there were lots and lots of misadventures. And when the stock market collapsed in 2008, I was completely crushed and was on the verge of homelessness. And in that was one of the first times I considered leaving the restaurant industry, but I decided to stick with it, even though it was practically impossible to find a job in San Francisco at that time. And what I did was I decided that I would test some of the principles of law of attraction and um, the magnetics of the universe and so forth. I decided I'd just test them out because I had nothing to lose at that point. I'd already lost everything in the crash of 2008. I was already on the verge of being evicted from my apartment. So I figured that I would test the system of just forcing myself to think nothing but positive thoughts and to really feel the positive thoughts when I was thinking them. Because we can all force ourselves to think something positive, and then that little voice in the back of our head says, "Yeah, right." You know, we get that sarcastic reaction. The subconscious mind doesn't believe what you're trying to affirm. But I tried to short circuit that by really infusing all of my positive thoughts and all of the gratitude that I was trying to stir up with deep emotion. And it was insane what happened. I mean, my life turned around on a dime.
Wow.
After about a couple of months, I got the best job I ever had in the restaurant industry. I connected with a new set of friends. I found an apartment that was half the price of what I was paying previously in a much, much better location. Everything in my life just kind of fell into place. This was in 2009. And at that point in time, I let my guard down. I started slipping into old patterns again. I started slipping into old habits. My ego started asserting itself again. I started getting competitive once again. And then in 2010, that whole house of cards collapsed once again.
Oh.
So I relived the collapse that I had in 2008. And it was at that point that I began to really realize that there is something to the law of attraction and deeper principles of how energy flows in the universe, but you really have to be vigilant and embrace them and embody them and live them in order for them to work for you.
Mhm.
Because, I've known a lot of people over the years who say, well, I tried law of attraction, it doesn't work for me. And it's possibly because they didn't really embrace it fully. So I stayed in the restaurant industry a few more years after that. I kept having expansion and collapse, expansion, collapse, expansion, collapse over and over again. And then I finally decided I've had enough collapse. I'm going to just live this, move into the spiritual principles that I've been studying for quite a while. And that was
Mm.
10 years ago. I'm now on my 10-year anniversary of LightBridge, and I couldn't be happier. So,
That's so great, Patrick. Thank you for sharing all of that. It's really inspiring. And I'd love to just sort of double click on some of it and like hear about the transition from college where you were studying religion and philosophy and spirituality to some degree, and then you made a big shift there that and where you left that behind. And then I'm curious as to during your time in the restaurant industry and the challenging times, did you see that as an egotistical sort of mind frame or mindset that you were in at the time, or is that something that you're seeing now in hindsight?
it's more in hindsight. I I don't think that very many people who are consumed with egotism are self-aware enough to realize that they're being egotistical. So
Uh-huh.
egotism, what is egotism? Well, the ego, first of all, is your sense of who you are as an individual separate and distinct from everybody else. And it's a product of living in this three-dimensional reality that we inhabit in a physical body. I have my physical body, you have your physical body. We are distinct and separate from this perspective. And we're both subject to three-dimensional space and linear time. So we have all these limitations. And seemingly, the only way for me to thrive and build the life that I want is to compete with you over the limited resources in this three-dimensional world. So egotism comes in when I begin to believe that I'm somehow better than you, or I'm superior to you, or that my needs are more important than your needs, and my voice is more important than your voice, and so forth. And so the competition really begins to ramp up at that point.
Right.
Now, that's the reality in this three-dimensional world, and we all have an awareness of higher dimensionality. And when you go higher and higher, or I would say deeper and deeper into higher dimensional states, you begin to realize that there is no separation between you and me. We are not distinct and separate from each other. In fact, we interpenetrate with each other. And so the deeper you go, the deeper that sense of interpenetration is, so that you and I are actually one being. And anything that I do to hold you back is actually holding me back. Anytime I'm competing with you, I'm actually competing against myself from that higher dimensional perspective.
Yes.
And as you begin to open yourself up to mystical experiences and slip into higher dimensionality more and more often, you begin to realize that. You begin to realize that the limitations that we have in this three-dimensional world and the distinctions that we set up, all these categories that we create in order to hierarchize things and put things in their boxes so that we can understand them better, that none of that exists in higher dimensionality. And so the ego doesn't exist in higher dimensionality. So what I had to learn, I'm kind of coming around very slowly to my point, was that my egotism was a profound blockage to my spiritual growth. I could have fallen into the trap that a lot of people fall into of spiritual egotism, the belief that because I have access to mystical experiences and you don't, or other people don't, or I have access to levels of intuition that most people never develop, that somehow I'm better than them. Or the belief that, I've had a vision, I've had this higher dimensional experience, and I've seen the universe from a different perspective. And then my ego tells me that I've seen the vast total sum of the universe and I understand it all. When really I've only seen the tiniest little sliver of what's out there. When I have a mystic, I've had some unbelievable, mind blowing mystical experiences, and I know you have as well. And I can go into a higher dimensional state and see something that I've never seen before and that I hardly understand at all from my physical perspective. If I take that back with me and I say, that's the truth of reality, that's the nature of the universe, then I'm just kind of limiting it once again. Because really, I've only just seen a tiny little sliver of what's out there. So, what I'm
Mm.
trying to say is that egotism, spiritual egotism, is the death of spiritual growth. And I needed to learn that. I needed to get, I needed to have the experience of profound egotism in my career in order to understand what a blockage it was for me to develop as a spiritual being. Nobody has a monopoly on truth. Nobody has a monopoly on truth with a capital T. So, what I teach as my experience of higher dimensionality, I'm not saying that's the truth of the universe. And if you teach something similar, you're stealing my idea because I'm in competition with you. I'm just sharing what I've experienced, and your mileage may differ, but we're all kind of growing together here.
Yeah,
Yeah, so thank you. Sorry for
absolutely.
babbling on.
Not at all. No babbling going on. It's all good stuff, and I think this is all really important for somebody on or on any level of their spiritual path to understand, some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges, some of the hurdles, and some of the direction that happens where, yeah, where the ego, we can have spiritual experiences and then the ego starts to take over, and because it will continue to try to insert itself in things, and it's an important part of our access and our ability to be here in these physical bodies and have this experience, but we don't want to put it in the driver's seat all the time. Hopefully not much of the time at all. It's more of like I like to think of the ego as a first mate or an assistant, or kind of like it helps with navigation, but otherwise higher self is in charge. So, but I think it's also really interesting how that in your early years in your college career and your university studies, you did go into the world of religion and spirituality,
Mhm.
and so that spoke to perhaps who you were going to become in later life. But clearly there were things happening in your early life as well, in your childhood. So I'd love to touch a little bit on that. You've told me about how you were meditating as a child and you didn't even know what it was. And you had some challenges around that too. So
Yeah.
you've been on a spiritual path. Perhaps it's been more in the background at times than others, but it's clearly been there. And I also love how you've posed that, well, the pathway into the restaurant world was a great teaching for you ultimately about the ego taking over and really kind of obliterating a lot of the things that really were meaningful to you. And then you found that again
Mhm.
through a crisis, which happens for so many of us in our lives, right? We need something to really wake us up before we get on perhaps a path that feels more in alignment or is more in alignment with who we really are and why we're really here. But anyway, let's go back to your childhood and your early life.
I grew up in a very small Catholic town in Kansas. It was extremely conservative. And I went to the Catholic school. I had the Catholic catechism, and I always felt that something was profoundly missing, and that things were pretty much off base with what my experience was, because I was having spontaneous mystical journeys when I was 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. I would leave my body and I would go places. And a couple of times I actually went someplace and got stuck there, and I was worried about how I'd get back to my body again. So I was having a lot of really interesting experiences, and there were a number of things that simply did not make sense to me as a child. So we lived in Atchison, Kansas, and every now and then we would drive to Kansas City or to Lawrence, Kansas. So a 1 hour car drive. And it made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever that we had to pass through every point in between to get from here to there. I didn't understand why we couldn't just be there, because when I was doing my mystical travels, I could just be there and I didn't have to pass through every point in between. I'd be there and then I'd pop back again. And then I would also uh, do a lot of kind of rhythmic rocking types of things that would lead me into meditative states. And
Mm.
what I was doing with my body actually looked pretty similar to what I've seen people do in Kundalini yoga in conjunction with the breath. So I was doing a lot of, like rocking my body like this and going into altered states of consciousness. And I would also sneak down to the church behind the house where I lived, and in the backside of the church, there was this alcove where a statue used to be. And I used to climb up into that alcove and I just sit there, I'd cross my legs and I'd just sit there and apparently I was meditating, but what I didn't know that's what I was doing. And people would find me and they'd ridicule me and they'd make jokes about me being the statue and so forth, and they'd ask me what I was doing and I'd say, well, I'm thinking, which they thought was ridiculous. What kid climbs into an alcove and thinks while everyone is off playing baseball or something? So I got a lot of ridicule. The ridicule kind of drove it out of me after a while. I began to realize that the more I went into meditation and altered states of consciousness, the more people were going to pick on me and call me names and ridicule me. And I was already getting enough of that already.
Mm.
So it just kind of died away. In my teens, I had a number of mystical experiences as well, but it wasn't like an everyday phenomenon like I was having when I was 8 or 9 years old.
So by the time you left high school, that was sort of all in the background or
Oh yeah,
thereabouts?
yeah. By the time I left high school, I was only motivated by two things: ego and sex. Those are the only two things that matter.
That sounds very high school-esque,
Yeah.
definitely. And certainly that's the way our culture, our society teaches us to be, really.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a specific or clear intention, but that's the world we live in, is that it promotes these things as being what's important, and all the sort of egotistical mindset parts of life that seem to be the most important for survival and whatnot. But it's certainly losing or missing a balance
Mm.
of some of these other things that now your life is so much about. So I'd love if you, just for fun and juiciness, if you could tap into and share a little bit more about like one of your most unique, mind-blowing mystical experiences, and that could be childhood or teens or more recent, whatever.
Well, I did have one that was actually kind of scary. Should I talk about that? And it wasn't scary. It was basically designed to kind of show me my place in the world and maybe put me in my place a little bit. But this was in a shamanic journey with Mamacita. And I'd had many, many shamanic adventures with Mamacita and the medicine, the Aya medicine. And I never really saw Mamacita very clearly. I could feel her. I could see her out of the corner of my eye. I could sense that she was present, but she was always behind me or off to the side or someplace in the distance, but still I'd be aware of her. And I eventually asked her to show me her face. Said, "Why won't you reveal yourself to me? We've had all these adventures together. You've been holding my hand through all sorts of childhood traumas that we've been digging up, and you refuse to show me your face. I want to see your face." And she said, "Okay, you asked for it." And then the whole universe exploded into infinity. And everywhere I looked, everything would explode into infinity. and I try to focus on a star or something that I could grasp a hold of in order to balance myself once again, and it would explode into infinity. And this went
What
on for about 20 minutes.
what does explode into infinity mean?
What it means is that I was overwhelmed with sensory stimulation, that everything that I looked at was kind of, I was kind of zooming into, and it was scoping outward and infinitely. So I'd look at a star. Because I was outside laying on the ground looking up at the sky, I did focus on the star and it would just kind of zoom at me. I'd be sucked into it. It would continue to expand and it would expand infinitely. So everywhere I looked, infinity upon infinity. And it was too much for me. It was just mind blowing.
Would you also call that the void?
Well, the void as well, because the void is infinite too. And, there's that old Sanskrit hymn that I'm sure you're aware of about, you take infinity out of infinity and infinity remains. So, yeah,
Yes.
and I was having that experience. So that was utterly mind blowing. And basically, what it told me was that any conceptual experience that I had, any experience that I had in the universe that told me what the universe is, was actually only the tiny fraction, like I was saying before.
Mhm.
That there's no way, from my perspective as a human being in a physical body with a human brain, no way I would ever understand what the vastness of the universe really is. It's too much for me. That was a bit of an ego check. It was also a revelation of just the immense power of the medicine and Mamacita and how much she was holding back for my sake, you know,
Yeah.
only
Wow.
revealing a tiny portion of herself to me in order to prevent me from melting down or having my circuits overloaded or circuitry blown or anything like that.
Yeah, it can be incredible and so powerful. And sometimes when we're in the middle of those kinds of experiences, it can potentially feel like too much or this is I can't handle it. But I do believe that in those experiences it may feel like we're being given more than we can handle, that we're never actually given more than we can handle. And it's like yes, it's pushing the limit, it's pushing us to the edge, but that's also what helps create the expansion that's possible through that kind of work. So I just want to clarify and back up a little bit that Patrick and I are talking about working with the plant medicine, or it's also considered a plant sacrament, ayahuasca, which is a beautiful and for some people controversial experience in the certain arenas of spiritual exploration. Many people have lots of opinions about it, but if it's done in a space of safety and integrity and attention to what we call set and setting in the world of psychedelics, it can be one of the most beautiful, life changing experiences of a person's life. And for most people, it's never just a one time thing. It opens up a journey that unfolds in whatever way is appropriate for each person and their individual path. So thank you, Patrick, for sharing that and for your sensitivity and using the term mamacita, which is one way that we can refer to ayahuasca. Sometimes we also refer to her as madrecita or mother Aya, or some communities refer to her as grandmother. There definitely is a sense that this is a feminine presence, a very wise feminine presence, which is often why people, I think, use the term grandmother. Would you like to say any more about ayahuasca or your feelings about that as a spiritual path or a spiritual, an opportunity for spiritual opening or awakening or healing, transformation?
Yeah, well, there are many, many pathways to expanding your consciousness. And ayahuasca and related plant medicines are extremely powerful for expanding your consciousness. And of course, it's not for everybody. There are certain groups of people that would probably not benefit from it, and they may actually create some harm for them, but a lot of people can really benefit from it. My experience is that it is profoundly life altering. I actually believe that ayahuasca saved my life.
Mm,
I have had many, many experiences of release of profound trauma from childhood and profound trauma from previous lifetimes.
mm,
There were certain dimensions of my life where I was deeply, deeply triggered by memories of things that happened to me in childhood, whether it was something that my mother did to me or my father didn't do, or whatever the situation was, there was a lot of trauma. And I could not look at it. It was too painful for me to look at. So I always carried these triggers with me. So every now and then somebody would accidentally hit one of my tripwires, and I would be in the traumatic memory of something that happened to me in childhood. And then everything would collapse. And I
mm,
lost friends and so forth. It was hard to connect with people. And more than any other practice I've ever done, ayahuasca has eliminated those traumatic events. I still remember them, but I don't relive them when I think about them now. And therefore, I'm completely neutral about the trauma, much of the trauma that I had in childhood. And it was Mamacita who took me by the hand and showed me what happened, and she showed me my childhood traumatic experiences, not just from my perspective, but from the perspective of everybody else involved.
mm,
And she showed me things that I did in my childhood that actually hurt other people, showed me these things from their experience, and a lot of healing grew out of that. So the triggers of my childhood are mostly gone. There's always more work to do, but and there's some past life work that needs to be done as well. But I credit ayahuasca with, I'm not overstating of what I credit with saving my life, because there were points in my life, even after I started my spiritual journey, where I was just ready to end it all. I was ready to be done. Okay, I've had enough. It's, I'm ready to move on. And Mamacita and ayahuasca helped me learn how to savor life again, go hiking in the woods and really savor the experience of nature through all of my senses. I wasn't doing that. I was walking through life like a lot of people do, completely oblivious to the beauty that was around me.
Yeah, and there's something about Mamacita, Mother Ayahuasca, that I think opens us up to the gifts and the blessings and the healing that's available through connecting with the natural world, which, you know, for most of us in especially in urban cultures, whether it's suburban or in a city, especially in the States, I think it's not really taught to be much of a part of our lives is connecting with the natural world. They talk about these days forest bathing, right? It's a nice term for spending time in nature and what's possible by sort of accessing the field of presence that is available to us in a forest or, on a mountain or by the beach and the healing that's available to us there and that recognizing that plants and the earth and they all have a level of presence and energy that is so healing to us. And yeah, I think when you do deep work with ayahuasca, you can't avoid that. And in fact, that getting in nature helps us process the things that ayahuasca helps us to move through us. And thank you for sharing all that you shared about the healing that she's brought. I've certainly had similar experiences. I don't know if I would say ayahuasca saved my life, but it certainly changed my life in very deep and rich ways. And yeah, it's never over. It's never done. There's always more, right? But we keep moving on. And my experience with it is that it just keeps expanding from healing, things in this life or in our childhood. And I think everybody has some level of what could be called trauma that has been shoved to the background by out of necessity. so that we could live our lives. But then, yeah, it percolates to the surface or gets triggered and it needs to be dealt with. But so once we sort of move beyond the healing of things in this life, or we've gotten to sort of an equilibrium in that place, and we can move on to perhaps assisting in our family lineages, our ancestral lineages, and then past lives, and then yeah, we if we're continuing to do the work and clarifying sort of our own channels, if you will, we are given access to have those kinds of experiences you had where Madrecita, grandmother Aya, she has so many names, showed you the infinite into the infinite into the infinite. And it's like my sense of that is it's like non-personal healing and non-personal exploration that's not necessarily personal to us. We're tapping into a collective consciousness
Mhm.
and seeing a broader perspective on what it's all about. And yeah, it's also we're never able to see all of it. And if we did, that would imply that, well, that would mean, I guess, that the universe is somehow limited, and it's definitely not limited. It's infinite. Thank you so much, Patrick, for all that you shared. It's very moving and beautiful, and your journey is very moving and beautiful as well. Let's fast forward to you stepped out of the restaurant world and you started creating a life around your own healing and spirituality and doing what you really felt, it sounds like, at a deep deep level was your calling. And you created LightBridge, and you've now written 2 books, and you're working on your third, and you're doing empowerment coaching, and you're helping others on their path, which is so beautiful. And I think, yeah, that's a big part of being on a spiritual path, is being in service to others. And as you mentioned before, recognizing that service to others is also service to self in a way, because we're all part of the same sort of system of consciousness that's is having this experience of life. So, where would you like to begin with that? I don't know where it began, whether it was with LightBridge, um, with the work that you're doing now.
Yes, well, LightBridge actually started several years ago as a tool for rewriting subconscious belief systems. So it was in the vein of theta healing and other systems out there in which you kind of dig into the subconscious mind to figure out what the limiting beliefs are that are preventing you from growing spiritually or thriving in this three-dimensional world, and then replacing those beliefs with something more empowering. But
Hmm.
then it developed into much, much more than that. What I do with LightBridge is I help people become more deeply aware of their connection with their higher self. And, I often have people ask me, how do I connect with my higher self? And my answer is always the same. You don't. You are your higher self. You just need to become aware that you are your higher self already. So your higher self is essentially you without all of the baggage that we have in three dimensionality. Your higher self is you without all the trauma and the negative memories and the limiting belief systems and the negative expectations and so forth that go into creating your experience in the world. And what I do in Lightbridge is help bridge the gap between where you are in your egoic persona and your higher self. And I call it light bridge because it essentially illuminates the gap between where you are and where you could be and shows you all of the traumas and limiting belief systems that are uh, in that area between here and there. So it's not so much about growing into something that's distinct and separate from you. It's about becoming who you truly are while you're in this three-dimensional world. So it's about remembering things that you've forgotten, remembering energies that you once had that you have become disconnected from or unaware of because of your three-dimensional experience. And your higher self knows exactly what you need to do to get from here to there so it can help you along the way. So we do a lot of attunements, energetic patterns that are drawn from the higher self and applied to your energy field as you currently are. We do a lot of belief sculpting. So in the connection with the higher self, we're able to massage or mold certain collections of belief systems, certain mythological collections of beliefs, such as poverty consciousness, molded into something more supportive for you. We help clear away some of the mythological belief systems that you've kind of clung to, like the starving artist or the blind seer, the belief that in order for you to develop one set of skills, you have to give up something else. So, in order to see psychically, you have to become blind physically, and so forth. And that can play itself out in a lot of different ways in people's lives. So, we help eliminate these interrelated collections of belief systems that are holding you back by bringing you more into alignment with the perspective of your higher self. So, is that making sense?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah, and it really actually makes me I'd like to sort of go off on a little bit of a tangent here and talk about the potential that of sort of flipping the what I think is a lot of people's understanding about perhaps what the goal of existence is. And maybe people in this realm have some understanding of a spiritual journey that's taking place. But I think a lot of religious systems of thought are sort of this mindset. Well, the goal is to stop incarnating and get out of the physical world so we can just be in heaven. And that's the goal. And that's where perfection is. And that's where it's all love and etc. And in my studies and my readings and in my own experiences and explorations, my sense is more and more confirming that what the goal is, well, yes, we can exist and do exist between lives in this other state. And there's perhaps a part of our soul that is always existing in the non-physical state. That one of the goals of incarnating is actually bringing higher consciousness, higher awareness, higher understanding, higher self, that state of all, maybe not all knowing, but I'll just call it the state of higher self into the physical world. And that perhaps the goal of, or one of the goals of source, or God or creator or infinite intelligence, whatever you want to call that, was or is perhaps the idea of infusing every part of creation ultimately with that higher essence and understanding. And so this points to the possibility and idea that actually humanity is in its infancy with its goals, and that ultimately, we're going to be here. Humanity is going to keep incarnating and going through changes and manifestations and transformations that will bring us to a point of actually embodying our higher conscious selves in physical form. And that's sort of the you could call that, maybe that's the utopia that people are looking for or thinking that is possible someday, and that from where we are now seems pretty impossible. Like, how could humanity even create that when you look at all of the problems we've had over the generations and the centuries? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, we are growing into that. More and more people are becoming aware of the immense internal power that they have and the deep connection they have with higher dimensional experiences. So, what do I mean by that? So, you said humanity's in its infancy, and I agree with you entirely. So, what is the experience of an infant? If you're an infant, it's all about survival and it's all about dependence on external support in order for you to survive. Because if you
Mm.
didn't have your parents taking care of you, if you didn't get food, if you didn't have, shelter and so forth, you would die because you're helpless. So the experience of humanity up until, recently, up until this point in time, has been one of figuring out how to navigate the external world. How do you navigate this three-dimensional reality in which you and I are distinct and separate from each other, and we're competing over limited resources? So we develop a worldview that tells us that everything is a zero-sum game, meaning in order for you to have more, I need to be deprived. In order for me to have more, you need to be deprived. In order for our group to have more, for us to protect our rights, we have to limit the rights of other groups. In order for us to have more power, we have to take away power from outsiders and so forth. And that's the way human political systems have developed, and economic systems and so forth. It's all about surviving and navigating the three-dimensional world, because that's our orientation in human infancy. But now we're growing up, we're maturing, we're beginning to realize that yes, the external world is important, but my power is actually inside me. That it's through my beliefs, my thoughts, my expectations, my traumatic memories, my emotional connections, and so forth, that I actually construct my experience in the world. And that if I want to make a change in the world, one technique is the old technique of, moving the chess pieces around on the board in front of me, or I can simply take control of my internal energy, my thoughts, my beliefs, my judgments, my expectations, and so forth, and through my internal power, attract to me things that support my vision for what I really desire. So this is in alignment with the law of attraction. And of course, law of attraction is not something that's taught in your physics class. It's not a physical thing, it's a higher dimensional thing. So when we begin to realize that our power is inside us, uh, we begin to realize as well that we no longer need to compete with each other. That in order for me to have my joyful experience in the world, I don't need to deprive you at all. Now, the problem that we're facing right now, it seems like things are getting worse before they're getting better. It's because there are lots and lots and lots of people in the world who are deeply, deeply invested in the old physical way of doing things.
Hmm.
And as we open up, not to say that we're better or we're on a accelerated pathway than others, but as other people open up to the spiritual dimensions and the awareness that we actually have some power inside us that has traditionally been overlooked. Um, the people who are deeply invested in the old way of doing things, the old power structures and the capital structure, they're doubling down. So they're really digging in their heels right now because they don't really like the toppling of the old system. But we're creating the new world. We're creating this new world in which there is cooperation and awareness that you and I maybe aren't distinct and separate from each other after all, that that's just an illusion, and we want to build our world around that. So is that making sense?
Absolutely, Patrick. Yeah, I love how you uh, express and share all of that. Yeah, there's so many things we could double click on here, and it's just all such good stuff. And I wish we had more time, but I'd like to take a little segue now, and just if you were to just describe your current spiritual perspective in your life today, how would you describe it?
My previous spiritual perspective had lots of triggers attached to it. So before, I was very, very easily triggered by people who had what I might call fascistic, capitalistic, religious belief systems. The people that would point the finger at me and say, you're going to burn in hell for all eternity because you are who you are, and so forth, or because you don't see the world the way I see it, you're doomed to burn in hell for all eternity. I got lots of that in childhood. I grew up with, um, like I said, I went to a Catholic high school. I went to the catechism classes before my Catholic high school, and the monks that taught us the courses at the school would often say, you turned in your homework late. You're going to burn in hell for all eternity if you don't
Oh,
change your ways."
oh my
So, I
gosh.
got a lot of that growing up, and I was hypersensitive to it. So my attitude now is that we are all on a spiritual journey, and there are all sorts of divergent pathways in order to grow into an awareness of higher dimensionality and to grow into an awareness of who you are as a spiritual being. The awareness of the higher self is part of that growth pathway for me, but it might not be part of the growth pathway for everyone else. So the spiritual pathway that people are on might take some interesting turns here and there that set them up for something better later on. So maybe some people need to go into the pathway of religious fundamentalism in order to learn something about how energy flows when you are in a very restrictive and dogmatic set of belief systems. Maybe that's the pathway that they need to be on in order to grow through it. So, my attitude now is that everybody is growing spiritually, but it doesn't always look like people are growing spiritually. It might look like somebody's taking steps backwards, but that step backward is actually the most efficient pathway for them to get to where they will eventually go. So I don't stand in judgment of other people's religions nearly as much as I used to. Now, if somebody is using their religion in order to justify cruelty to somebody else, then I'm going to say something about it. And we do see a lot of that happening in today's world. We do see a lot of people justifying outright humiliation of other people and cruelty, and even the destruction of their economic lives and well being, destruction of their home, even, and justifying it because my religion, God tells me I need to do this. So I'll speak up in that type of situation, but for the most part, I think we're all growing spiritually, and we all have different pathways. And I'm not here to judge your pathway, and I don't want my pathway to be judged. So, yeah. So is that making sense? I know
Oh,
it sounds like it
absolutely.
was
Yeah.
contradictory a little bit, but
No, no. I love how you pose it, is that no matter how it looks, everybody's on a path.
Mhm.
And we're all, I think, even if someone is completely unaware of it, we're all being guided in some direction. And just like you had the experience of going down what you called the egotistical route that ended up putting you into a place of crises with your career in the restaurant world, we'll be taken into whatever path is necessary to bring us to a stage of, whether that's awakening
Yep.
or figuring out what's next or figuring out what actually works for us. And everybody's ultimately on that path. And it's easy to look at others' paths and be judgmental. I agree. And letting go of judgments, I think, is a key part of being on a consciously spiritual path. But yes, I also agree that it's important to stand up when we see injustice taking place and harm and cruelty in the name of religion or whatever it is.
Mhm.
That's one of the things I love about Buddhist teachings. Is one of the, like, I think it's the five precepts of all Buddhist thought is the concept of no harm. No harm to self, no harm to other, no harm to the planet. And from there, if we can all agree on that, what a beautiful world it could be.
Yeah.
I'd love to just hear some of your insights and guidance for people based on your own personal work and on the work that you offer for others. If you could give advice to someone seeking a deeper connection with themselves and with all that is, what would that be?
For people who are first starting out, I usually give 3 bits of advice, and I've actually already talked about a couple of them, I think. So the first is just be wary of egotism, and how that can slow you down for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Because I could have gone down the pathway of thinking that my ability to have out of body experiences somehow meant that I was elite and disconnected from everyone else and that I was special. I could have ended up going down the pathway of either creating a cult or falling into a cult. And usually, when you're in a cult, there's the belief that our pathway is the one pathway. What we're doing is the only truth in the universe, and you need to shun everybody else and block them out of your life because they're only going to slow you down. Okay, so egotism, spiritual egotism in particular, are going to slow you down. So be aware of that. Um, the second bit of advice that I usually give people, I think I alluded to it earlier, is don't forget that old parable about the blind man touching the elephant. Do you know that one?
Yes, please share it.
There's this elephant, and there are these blind men, and they're all describing the elephant, and one thinks it's a tree trunk, and another one thinks it's a rope, and another one thinks it's a great big tube that's flexible. Another one thinks it's a wall, and it's because they're all touching different parts of the elephant. So, that's what I was saying earlier about if you have a profound mystical experience that blows your mind and it's beyond anything you've ever seen before, don't make the assumption that that is the truth of all reality everywhere. That that experience may in fact just be a teeny tiny little sliver of the higher dimensional experience, and you're just seeing it from one perspective.
Mhm.
So, open yourself up to all sorts of different perspectives and angles and experiences so you don't slip into like one specific groove and never get out of it again. The third piece of advice I give for people is don't burn burn up your circuitry. Don't do too much too fast. I also learned this the hard way because before I began connecting with Mamacita through ayahuasca, I was doing lots and lots of profound, deep breath work. And I almost became addicted to breath work. And the breath work was unbelievably profound for me. So when you're doing breath work, you stimulate the pineal gland to produce DMT. DMT, the God molecule, it's also um, what kind of drives the connection with Mama Madrecita in ayahuasca. This energy work that I was doing actually burnt out my circuitry for a while, and I got really sick. I was
Hmm.
overwhelmed with electrical jolts and feeling like I was halfway outside my body and I couldn't get back into it again. I felt like my physical body was separate from my emotional and my mental body, and I tried to push them together, but then they'd slide off the other way. I would feel like I was walking along, but I was behind myself outside of my body, and therefore I was unprotected. I couldn't really see what was in front of me, so um, I was prone to tripping and falling down. And it was all
Wow.
because my circuitry had been fried, and that caused my physical, mental, and emotional body to come disconnected from each other. And every time I try to connect them, I'd get these really powerful electric jolts. And then, of course, all of that grew into insomnia and panic attacks, and it was just awful. So don't do too much too fast. And I know for a fact, this was in my early days after I left the restaurant industry, that my desire for lots and lots of profound experiences was ego driven. I needed to have more and more and more and more, but it wasn't serving me. Go at
Mhm.
a pace that makes sense. What that really means is that whenever you have a deeply healing experience or you have a profound revelation that comes to you through a mystical journey, you absolutely must take time to integrate what you've done before moving on to the next thing. If you
Yes, thank
pile
you.
too many things on top of each other without ever integrating any of them, you're setting yourself up for a lot of pain. And that's not the goal, you know? So slow down and integrate before moving on.
Thank you. That's so important. Yeah, that's such a huge part of any work in this realm. But I got to ask you, how often were you doing breath work at the time? And
Oh God, 3 times a day, 4 times a day for like at least half an hour a session. And then, like, before I go to bed, I would do breath work, but I'd also have on binaural beats. So I
oh
would be
wow,
listening to binaural beats as I was doing the breath work. I was, like, layering things on top of each other, and
do you think it
yeah,
was also you were seeking an escape?
I think it was, you know, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because for me, mysticism isn't about escaping this reality, it's about learning something about yourself so that you can better live out this life in this
Yes.
three-dimensional reality. So, I
Yeah.
often talk about practical mysticism, and what I mean by practical mysticism is you're not doing it to escape, you're not doing it solely for the fun of it. It's not entertainment. You're doing it in order to heal yourself so you can better accomplish whatever the mission is or the purpose you have for incarnating in human form in this lifetime. And if you don't, you know, if you don't fulfill your mission, you'll probably have to come back and try again. So,
Yeah, I love that, Patrick. It's very interesting because I would similar to you, I would have out of body experiences as a child. And then, as I progressed in age, they started to drop away, but I would still have them now and then. And I started to become curious about them again about 20 years ago or so. And I started doing some studies in that realm. And it was also at a challenging part of my life. And I think part of it was that I wanted to escape. I may have even had some suicidal tendencies at times in challenging moments of my life, but I don't know if I would have ever actually gone through with it, but it did kind of translate into thinking, okay, well, if I can get out of my body on a regular basis, then I'm going to gain more knowledge from higher self or some broader perspective that will assist me, but it will also help me to feel disconnected from the things that were causing pain in my life. And I was on that path for a few years, studying out of body experiences with different groups and having some pretty deep and rich experiences. But then I found the ayahuasca path and opportunities, and my work with ayahuasca actually challenged me to, and really kind of, I don't want to say forced me, but showed me that really the answer was inhabiting my body while understanding these broader principles and working on myself and healing my trauma and connecting with all that is and understanding myself and my life path from a broader perspective, or at least starting to. And so from going from studying out of body experiences and astral travel to working with ayahuasca and other kinds of studies in that realm, it really sort of brought me back in to center and made me realize that, well, yeah, I came to live in this body and have this life, and there's a purpose for it, and there's a reason, and it's a beautiful path if I'm willing to do the work. And it is possible to leave behind trauma and all of those things that were making me potentially suicidal and were giving me challenges. And that now that I look back at that, well, I'm not certainly in any way perfect where I am now. I can see that all of those challenges had deep and profound purpose and reason for coming into my life because they propelled me in new directions. So, but let's get back to you. So, I'd like to ask you, how can somebody build a personal spiritual practice that evolves with them over time?
There's no one size fits all approach to that. Of course, it's all individual. And it's really important for people to maybe experiment, play around, see what works for them. If you're searching for a pathway, and you're desperate to find a pathway, it can be easy to fall under the influence of somebody who has an agenda, and they're going to say, okay, this is the pathway for you. You're obviously meant for this. And I've seen a lot of people slip into religious organizations or cult like groups. They're nervous about it. It doesn't feel right to them, but then it feels dangerous to leave. They become invested in it, and then they're stuck for a while. And sometimes they're stuck there permanently. So I think it's really important to develop a clear connection with your higher self. Like I said, you already are your higher self. So it's just an awareness of what drives you internally to figure out what pathway is meant for you. If you're giving your power away by asking others what you should do, what pathway you should follow, then you're not likely to find the pathway that's best for you. So a lot of times that involves testing things out, seeing what works, you know. And I've tested out a lot of different pathways. Um, and I have found a few things that work, and I found a few things that absolutely do not work. I found a couple of pathways that are actually designed by their very nature to keep you stuck at a certain level so that you need them permanently. And that um, there's an old saying, hidden saying in the coaching industry is that the best client is the one who never gets better. So I've encountered a couple of groups where simultaneously they're working on healing one dimension of your life while at the same time making you unstable in a different dimension of your life. And that way there's always something that needs healing, and therefore you're stuck there forever. I'm not going to name names, but I've seen a few.
Wow. Do you think that they're actually have that intention?
I don't think they started out with that intention, but then money changes things sometimes, not always. But there are certain groups that became very powerful, and then they saw their numbers start to decrease, and then they needed to come up with new strategies to keep people stuck. Yeah. In fact, all the 2 groups that I'm thinking of, both of them had, like, explosive growth, and then they began to shrink, and then they morphed into something a little bit more insidious. So, it's sad. It's so sad that, um, that there can be that type of manipulation and exploitation, but it
Absolutely.
exists. Yeah. So, essentially what I'm trying to say is that when you turn inward and you test out a few things and you see what works for you, what really resonates for you, what really lights you up inside without stimulating ego. And you have that ability to recognize the difference between something that's feeding you spiritually and something that's feeding your ego. Then you can organically fall into the pathway that will lead you to your growth. But that egotism part of it is a really, really important thing because some of these pathways that I mentioned that can keep you stuck, they bring you into the group through flattery, and they stoke your ego, tell you you're special, you're different, you belong to our elite class of people, and then that feeds your ego, you move in, and then you're stuck for a while. Now, like I said, that might be an experience that somebody needs in order to learn something and grow, but if you're stuck there permanently, then that might be, a limitation or a problem.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think it's so important. And it's one of the questions that I ask all of my guests is, are there any red flags that people should be aware of when exploring different paths, different communities, teachings, teachers?
The number one red flag is flattery.
Hmm.
Yeah. I've had people, approach me and say, "Wow, you are really special." And, the fact is you are special. You're probably more special than you've ever given yourself credit for, but so is everybody else. So your specialness is not a call for egotism. You are special, and I wish everyone in the world would recognize just how truly special they are without the competition. But when somebody comes to me and says, "You're one of the chosen ones," and there's an elite group of chosen people who are here to change the world, and we want you to join our group because we know that you have a God-given pathway to glory, that's a red flag. That's definitely a red flag.
They're simply appealing to the ego, of
Yeah.
course.
Hmm.
They're
Yeah.
not appealing to higher self that
Hmm.
would know otherwise. Yeah, one of the things that I often tell people that ask me this kind of question is, if you're interested in joining a group, or some sort of a community, and you're trying to like gauge, is this a good place? Is the person who's in charge, trustworthy and worthwhile of my time and my money and my attention and my even my reverence? And I think one of the best ways to do that is to sort of see if you can somehow see behind the scenes, like volunteer.
Yeah.
Don't just go to events and see the person come on stage and then leave. You need to see what's going on behind the scenes, maybe even get to know their staff. Or maybe, again, I think volunteering can be a great way to see, well, what is this leader and their team like behind the scenes? How do they interact with one another? Is there a control tactic going on? Is there a lot of ego? Is the leader, when they go out on stage, presenting one persona to the audience, and then when you see them off stage behind the scenes, they're totally different? And those are just huge red flags. And the challenge can be that when the teaching feels worthwhile and like there's something valuable in the teaching, we often will discount all those red flags. We'll think, well, the teaching is more important and what it's offering. And, I can live with the fact that the teacher may seem egotistical at times, or maybe is mean, or tells little white lies here and there, or whatever it might be, because the teaching is great. And I suppose somebody, if they are going into that with an awareness of that, maybe they can weather that for a certain period of time. But ultimately, it can become um, very invasive and very disruptive in somebody's life, because I think the longer you stay in a situation like that, the more you get pulled in and pulled in and pulled in. And yeah, ultimately, if you're able to step out of it and still have a sense of yourself, it can be a great learning experience. And yeah, sometimes learning comes in darker experiences like that. But I think the more awareness we bring into it, the more we can touch on things and really see and navigate our own path in a way that we don't have to go through those really dark places.
Yeah, and that is absolutely crucial these days because there are some very, very powerful transformational tools right now that are being monetized. And there are lots of groups out there that they're not really sincere in their desire to use, let's say, ayahuasca, for example, for uplifting and healing and liberating mankind. It's about building a retreat center where the most famous celebrities all come and we make lots and lots and lots of money, and we're actually pretty competitive and even cutthroat behind the scenes. So there are a couple of organizations, and the sad thing would be if somebody has a negative experience in one of those organizations and then blames the medicine. That's
Right.
one of my fears because the medicine itself is astounding and magnificent and transformational for certain groups of people, not for everyone. But if somebody is kind of warping it into something ego driven and performative and bragging about what celebrities they have coming to them and so forth like that, it does a disservice to the medicine itself. And that's unfortunate.
Absolutely.
It's happening a lot these days. And it's not just ayahuasca, it's all sorts of different tools that are profoundly powerful, but they're getting a bad rap.
And I do think that that is natural when something becomes more widely known and widely spread. There's going to be groups that are doing it with integrity and beauty and sacredness the way it should be done. But there's also going to be other groups that want to use it more as a business model to attract attention and money, etc.
Mhm.
And it's really important to know that. And especially since we're talking about, or we have talked about ayahuasca in this episode, that people should know that there are many, many different groups offering that, both in South America and around the world, as well as in the States. And it's very important to be careful about who you choose to work with. And you can have vastly different experiences of working with ayahuasca depending on the group that you're with. Even though, yes, I think ultimately the sacrament itself, if it's produced in a loving way of integrity and beauty, that it can produce a beautiful experience. But if it's not, if you're not doing the ceremony or the experience with it in a way that is held with integrity and safety and care, and so that you can really surrender and trust the people that you're working with, and allow yourself to have the experience that is intended for you, it can be very problematic. Moving on here, Patrick. Let's see here. Well, let's just go to a fun question. What is, or what are your all-time favorite spiritually oriented books, if you
Oh,
have one or two or three, other
oh
than
my
your own, of
gosh.
course?
Yeah, okay. Well, this is it's an interesting question. Okay, so when I was in my teen years, I was madly, madly in love with Illusions by Richard Bach. And I must have read it 50 times. And of course, I read Jonathan Livingston Seagull as well, but there was something about Illusions that really, really spoke to me. And to
Mm,
this day, there are passages from that book that I still reference. There's the quote from the book that the sometimes the best way or the easiest way to avoid responsibility is to say I have responsibilities, and that is I'm too busy for my own spiritual growth. So that book I was madly in love with. I haven't read it in years. I should probably break it out again. And so I highly recommend it for anyone who hasn't read it. It's deeply magical, and it's all about the hidden potential that lives inside every person and how to tap in to the magic that's inside you, how
mm,
to stop looking for some sort of magic wand outside of you that's going to fix your problems, and realize that you yourself are a magical being, and that if you can tap into your internal power, you can create that magic in your life that you've been looking for. So I love that. I love that. Wow, there have been a number of others over the years. Of course, the standards that people mentioned, The Prophet and The Little Prince. I found a lot of motivation in that as well. The Bhagavad Gita, of course, but um, that is from a tradition that's completely different than mine, but I still found power in it.
So we're talking about books. Let's just talk briefly about your books.
Like you said, I published two, and I'm actually working on two others now.
Oh, two others.
The first book that I published is called Brain Cells, Escape Your Mental Prisons. And I'm actually working on a second edition of it right now, which I might publish under a new title. I might just call it Escape Your Mental Prisons. But this is all about how you take control of your internal power and let go of all of the mental blockages that are preventing you from actually thriving in the world. So that's a book about personal empowerment. The second book I wrote was called Lucid Living. No, it's called Dreamscape, The Power of Lucid Living. And in Dreamscape, what I talk primarily about is how you can use lucid dreaming as a easy to learn pathway into expanded consciousness. So if you can train yourself to lucid dream, then you can begin to use the lucid dream experience as a springboard into higher dimensionality, and then you can carry what you learn back into the modern world. I would call that lucid living. But if it's more, it's about more than just lucid dreaming. I talk about other pathways to consciousness expansion, such as breath work, such as plant medicine, and so forth there. And then the third book is called Good Sex, and it's about um, coming to terms with a lot of the sexual trauma and repression that have been laden upon us through the weapon of shame. And we're often taught that sexuality and spiritual growth are mutually exclusive or they impede each other. That if you're having, satisfying sex, it has to be nasty or dark or somehow anti spiritual. And in order for you to have what would be well controlled sex or good sex, it would have to be bland and boring and so forth. So that is primarily a book about overcoming the trauma of sexual shame and self disgust and so forth in order to incorporate sexual awareness in your spiritual growth.
Hmm.
And then the fourth book is called Myths to Stop Living By. And this is about how to let go of some of those mythological narratives that we hold on to, such as the blind seer or the Sisyphus myth, where you are rolling that ball up the hill, and if you get it over the hill, it will liberate you, but then it all comes crashing down again, and you have to start over from scratch. The damsel in distress, and all sorts of other narratives that carry with them a lot of limiting beliefs that manifest themselves in your life's experience. So those are the four. I don't know when I'll be finished with the two that haven't been published yet, but I'm well on the way to getting them done this year. So yeah, I'm excited about them both.
That's so great, Patrick. You're so busy. You
Yeah.
got so many things going on. It's wonderful. I just love that you have so many offerings for people on their paths. And with that, can you tell us about your online courses and your offerings in personal empowerment
Oh, wow.
coaching?
Yeah. So my website is patrickprohaska.com. It's also sexpowersoul.com. And, like I mentioned, my first three books, one's about power, one's about sex, one's about spiritual expansion. So sexpowersoul.com. And I have a number of courses there. I teach how to do the LightBridge technique for your own personal transformation and healing, and also how to learn the LightBridge technique so that you can use it on others in order to heal them. And that's a very, very well developed course. For the intro course, I have a manual that is a dense 100 pages long. So I've really put a lot of time, energy, and effort and love into creating the Lightbridge courses. I've got courses on sexual healing, on expansion of consciousness, on intuition development, on personal empowerment. And then I also have some audio packages where you basically listen to the audio package and experience the attunements that are built into them. So I've got both the intellectual courses and the experiential audio packages there. I do live events about twice a month, free live events on Sundays. And then I have an archive of events going back 7 years. There must be 200 events in the archive. So you can dive into that and experience all sorts of transformational journeys.
Wow. And then you also offer one-on-one coaching, don't
I
you?
offer one on one as well. I do integration coaching. I do LightBridge healing. And for the LightBridge healing, you can either do something really concentrated and energetic, that's almost like a blast of Reiki energy that lasts about 25 minutes, or you can have a full session in which we dig around in the subconscious mind and past lives and so forth in order to find the roots of whatever the issues are.
I love that. Wow, I didn't know you offered that. I'm going to have to sign up for one of those.
Yeah, yeah, for all sorts of goodies.
That's so
Yeah.
great. Last question for you. What is a simple but powerful practice someone could do today to feel more spiritually aligned, perhaps even more aligned with their inner guidance?
One of the exercises that I have people do in my intuition course and in my dreamscape course is to develop your clairvoyance at night when you climb into bed and you close your eyes. Usually, we just kind of close our eyes and ignore what's there so that we can go to sleep. But close your eyes and really pay attention to what you see in your visual field with your eyes closed. You will notice that there is texture to the darkness. You will notice that there is shadings of color that are very subtle that you normally don't see, and that there are light patterns flowing through your field of vision when your eyes are closed. And like I said, it's very subtle, and usually we don't notice it at all. So the tool is to just begin to be aware of that. And then you'll notice after a while that sometimes when you're in bed, it's dark, you close your eyes. It's actually brighter with your eyes closed than when your eyes are open. And when the first time I noticed that, it really kind of knocked me sideways because I knew something was going on. So it's dark in my room. I close my eyes, and then there's this light show dancing in front of me. And inside that light show is information and memories and visions and so forth. And as you develop your keenness, your ability to see what's there, it will resolve into information that can be helpful to you. One way to speed this up is you have your eyes closed, and then with your eyes closed in the darkness, you take one of your hands and you begin to move it around in front of your face. And I guarantee you, very, very quickly, you will begin to see your hand as an energy, this glowing energy, with your eyes closed. And you may open your eyes and not see your hand at all because it's dark in the room, but then you close your eyes and you can see it very, very clearly in front of you glowing as you're moving it around. So that's a way to deepen your blossoming ability to see clairvoyantly. Um, and then from there, you can do other things. With your eyes closed, you can begin to feel the energy that's flowing through your body that you're normally unaware of. And the easiest way to do this is to just take one of your hands and then take the finger of your other hand and point it at your palm and rotate your finger or kind of slide it back and forth. Very quickly, I guarantee you, it will feel as if you're touching the palm. And you can move your hands farther away and still feel the touch of your finger on the palm of your hand, even though you're pretty far away from it. Those are really simple things that you can do, and they give you evidence that your body is an energy field and that you have tools at your disposal that you just haven't developed yet. You don't need to see physically in order to see. You can see in pitch darkness with your eyes closed. You can begin to develop that gift of seeing psychically.
I love all of that, Patrick. Thank you so much. Those are, yeah, really wonderful gifts that you shared for people to try out, to know ourselves as so much more than just these magnificent physical bodies.
Hmm.
Thank you so much, Patrick. It's been a joy to talk with you. Really enjoyed this conversation and wish that it could go on longer.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Well,
we'll have to do another one after your next book comes out or something like that. That
oh,
would
that
be
sounds good to
amazing.
me. Thank you.
Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. Highest vibes to you and blessings as you continue your beautiful and important work in being an agent of transformation in our world. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, what a great and inspiring conversation with Patrick. I'm so grateful to him for joining me today. I hope you'll find it helpful for you as you navigate your own journey. For more information about Patrick and his work, visit patrickprohaska.com. That's Patrick, Prohaska.com. And there you'll find all the scoop on his work and his offerings, as well as his books, appearances, and events. Patrick is also available for lectures, seminars, and workshops around the globe. And as always, it's my intention to make the resources and information that were mentioned as easy as possible for you to track down. I'll be posting as many as possible of the resources, concepts, and methodologies that were mentioned in our conversation on the soulunique.com website, so you can check them out if you like. And it's my intent, as the Soul Unique podcast continues to grow and expand, to turn the soulunique.com website into a rich library of useful and inspiring information and resources that can help assist you in uncovering, forging, and navigating your personal spiritual path. If you'd like to join me on this journey, I encourage you to sign up for the Soul Unique mailing list at soulunique.com, and I'll keep you up to date on new episodes, inspiration for your unfolding path, and other resources. Lastly, I'd just like to add a quick plug here that if you appreciated and resonated with this episode, I'll be forever grateful and honored if you would please like, follow, and maybe even write a short comment about the episode on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. It will help tremendously in spreading the good vibes about forging a personal spiritual path, as well as about this new and continually evolving podcast. Thanks for your consideration, and thank you very much for listening today. I hope you'll continue to tune in to the Soul Unique podcast in the future, and I'm wishing you well and sending you highest vibes as you continue to navigate your life, and yes, perhaps even your own personal spiritual path. Thank you for being here.